Hello everybody, my name is Kayla and I'd like to welcome you to your recovery. In this video I'm going to talk about trigger events, what a trigger event is, and what trigger events affected me personally. Now, a trigger event is just what happened that set everything into motion, what it was that triggered the seemingly sudden onset of chronic or debilitating issues. A trigger event is essentially the straw that broke the camel's back, what it was that switched everything from being okay to not. Trigger events can be related to trauma, either physical or emotional. They're also at times related in large part to stress and anxiety, or even a sickness or illness experienced by somebody. My trigger events, what predisposed me to being able to be triggered into the sort of conditions and symptoms that I was experiencing was this chronic stress. I struggled with my mental health my whole life. I had issues with anxiety and depression. I was never able to manage my stress well, and I failed to have a lot of balance within my life. All areas of my life were just grossly unbalanced, and eventually it manifested physically into a severe debilitating neuromuscular symptoms and musculoskeletal imbalances. I had some physical factors, but I was never acutely injured like some people are. The physical trigger events are generally fairly easy to identify. I do identify with one physical trigger event, and that was after I gave birth to my daughter. I had hemorrhaged and I fell onto my left shoulder. I fell and I landed on my kid's PlayStation controller, I think it was. I'd had my daughter at home. The birth was fantastic. Everything went so well, but my placenta failed to deliver afterwards. I ended up hemorrhaging. I just wanted to get cleaned up a little bit before we called the ambulance, and I stood up to walk to my bathroom and just passed right out. Landed hard, unconscious, unbroken fall onto my left side. I remember when I got home from the hospital thinking how much my shoulder hurt. Like, of everything I'd been through, I had to go and have the placenta surgically removed. It had actually grown into my uterus, which is why it did not expel after the birthing process was complete. After all of that, it was my shoulder that bothered me. And I noticed after I'd had my daughter that the lights looked different. The lights just seemed weird. It seemed like I was in a different place or a different time. I honestly didn't think much of it at the time because I'd had strange signs and symptoms my whole life. My body had never been quite typical. My brain was never quite typical. So honestly, for me, I was just missing all the signs of something that was becoming a progressive issue. I had my first brain episode when my daughter was just a few months old. I did not know what it was at the time. I was driving and I was coming up to, it's like a little common in town. You come up and it's a circle. And I just started feeling strange. It was like I had pressure building into the top of my brain, and a glass dome was being set over me, and then it was like water poured out of the top of my brain. I pulled off into the fire station and I just sat there and kind of had to let this happen. I sat there as the pressure built up, the water washed out, and then my body just I felt like I'd been electrocuted. I was very weak. I was just I had experienced something and I wasn't even sure what it was. I used to do a lot with, supplements, alternative health, diet. I'd been working my way up with daily iodine at the time. So I posted in, my iodine group asking about a potential detox reaction. And the response I got was that I didn't use the iodine properly and had a tremendous detox reaction. So I just internalized this and went about my day. I stopped using the iodine. I figured my body was just too toxic and I would never be able to detox, whatever. Stopped using it. Didn't seem to really I had had some other things, like I I noticed it was hard for me to wear like a lanyard around my neck. Like having something around my neck was just bothersome. I couldn't tie like my swim tops up over my neck. I began tying them so they cross in the back because I couldn't have anything pulling on my neck. But again, strange signs and symptoms. My whole life, this to me was not anything worth noting. So time goes on. I eventually am doing a lot of driving. I fall pregnant with my 5th child. I was taking my son to see a chiropractor, so I began doing chiropractic adjustments as well. And this, I believe, is a second trigger event for me. I had very harsh and fast chiropractic neck manipulations. And before that time, I never, ever was dizzy. I was never dizzy. And I remember my ears started hurting me, and I would ask the chiropractor at the visits, I'd be like, can you look at my ears? My ears are hurting me, and I'm feeling kind of swimmy when I drive, and it was a whole thing. So I'd had my baby, and he finally could do some x-rays, because we couldn't do x-rays when I'd started care because I was already pregnant at the time. So he finally did x-rays, and he showed me my body and how it deviated from side to side. Like my from the front hip x-ray, one hip looked bigger than the other because I was so, tilted one way. Like the perspective on the films was just incredibly affected by the misalignment I had that he could specifically notice within my pelvis. So, I was trying to do these adjustments and getting my neck cracked, and I was just getting worse and worse. And then I think this is kind of where my last trigger event comes in. I'd had my baby. He was another high needs child. I spent a lot of time carrying babies in my belly and in my arms, and wearing my 5th child in a baby carrier put a lot of strain onto my shoulders. I was unable to heal at this point. I could tell, my shoulders were strained, my neck was strained, and things just weren't healing. I eventually developed a nerve pain in between my shoulder blades that I would refer to as white hot lightning. It's like my shoulder blades just burned, and they just burned like white hot lightning, just right up my spine, right up between my shoulders. Again, I didn't really, nothing new to me. I've always been in pain. My body's always been weird. Like I really just I couldn't see what was happening to my body. I could move my shoulders and they would just pop. Like I remember I told my husband, I was like, listen to this. And I would move and they would just like every time it was popping and dislocating. My shoulders had destabilized. My scapulas were moving all over my back. It was pulling on my neck. It even affected into my pectoral muscles, which are trying to compensate for the horrific instability and musculoskeletal imbalance that had manifested in my body. I had my first doctor's appointment in October of 2019 for ear pain. By January 2020, I was having regular brain episodes. I was often debilitated in bed. My pain levels were constant and just off the chart. And I knew when I made an appointment for my ears. I was like, my ears hurt all the time. I'm getting dizzy. Something is wrong. And that's when I began seeking medical treatment and intervention for some of the issues I was having. I had a lot of incidental findings along the way. They found an arachnoid cyst in my brain, a mild Chiari malformation, a cerebellar tonsillar ectopia with brainstem and cranial nerve compression at the foramen magnum, a nearly pathological atlas bone misalignment. It was both tilted and rotated. So I had that head tilt to the left, my shoulder was raised up. I was severely affected by the time everything kind of came to fruition. And it seemed to be very sudden. All of a sudden my ears hurt. All of a sudden I was dizzy. But once I was really able to sit with what was happening and think about everything that had transpired, it was very clear that I had been affected by stress since I was very young. I've had tinnitus since I was a child. And that failure to manage stress throughout my life manifested physically. I think back on signs and symptoms from 10 years ago that I had, that I just didn't understand what was going on. I instinctively knew that I was getting unwell and I was trying to express this, but I just didn't have all of the answers, all the pieces to the puzzle just yet. So that for me, I do feel like I was affected by several different things. They each just kind of notched away at the last remaining integrity I had with my health, and it put me into a chronic disease process that was, further unmanaged for about 9 months last year. I struggled a long time. The doctors really didn't know what to do with me. They did say everything I was diagnosed with shouldn't be making me dizzy. That was my complaint, was dizziness, and you go to the doctor for dizziness and they don't know what to do with you. So, and again, your trigger event is going to be different. Everyone's is a little bit different, but we all have those events that affected us and brought on additional symptoms and started the disease process. I believe that when my shoulders destabilized, my neck went out and everything was just pulled and my body was doing its best to compensate. But as you know, a stress response, a repeated stress or trauma response after so long becomes damaging, and that's exactly what was happening in my body. So when you sit and think about it, what was the trigger event that affected you? I welcome you to tell me in the comments. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Lets me know that you enjoy what I'm doing and that I should be doing more of it. Feel free to share, and if you haven't already, subscribe. I'm working on more videos so that I can share everything I've learned along my recovery journey. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.